Guitar Co-op Podcasts. Great composers. Conceived and presented by Fabio Zanon. People often ask me, do you play pop music, or what do you think of pop music? Well, I've been asked very often, so I have a kind of ready-made answer for those questions. I prefer to play what I play best. Or, as with any genre, I love some pieces and I dislike others. However, I always get annoyed when this is presented as a kind of confrontation, as if the genres were competing with each other instead of starting a dialogue. Cut. In another episode, young students ask me for advice. They say that they would love to play the guitar full-time, but their parents would love them to have a kind of more traditional career, so they go to college to attend a different kind of course, and they don't have much time to play the guitar well. For me, this kind of division of interests is false, and it has always been for the past 400 years. In this episode, I will talk to you about a Spanish nobleman who studied philosophy and theology, who was ordained a priest, and published poems of his own and extensive translations. He traveled around Europe to study and taught music at the University of Salamanca in Spain. And he also published a 3-part method where he summarized the popular Spanish music of his time, which is now a pillar of the classical guitar repertoire and a kind of totem of a golden age of Spanish music. Our composer in the month of April is Gaspar Sanz. This is Ruggiero, played by Aniello Desiderio, in an album he made for GuitarCoop called Chacon, that you can hear on streaming. With his books and poems now completely forgotten, Sanz's presence today is due solely to his method, instruction of music upon the Spanish guitar. It was published between 1674 and 75. Together, the 3 books contain 90 short pieces, approximately 2 hours of music if played in sequence. With this limited legacy, he brings to the 21st century a portrait of the musical practice of an era that, instead of being something remote and disconnected from our reality, already carries some of these questions that seem to be constant throughout the history of music. This is Hopkinson Smith playing Marisápalos by Gaspar Sanz. He was baptized as Francisco Bartolomé Sanz Selma on April 4th, 1640, in the town of Calanda de Ebro in the province of Aragon in Spain. In his youth, he adopted the name Gaspar and always referred to himself by that name. His family had financial resources and sent him to study theology, philosophy, and music at the University of Salamanca, which is the oldest in Spain. Almost nothing is known about his private life and little about his biography. After being ordained a priest, Sanz traveled to Naples, Rome, and perhaps Venice, possibly to further his musical studies. It seems that he studied with Orazio Benevoli, conductor of the Vatican Choir, and with Cristoforo Caresana, who was the organist of the Royal Chapel in Naples. It is also possible that he also worked in Naples as an organist. José Miguel Moreno playing Canciones by Gaspar Sanz. But where does Sanz's relationship with the guitar begin? It seems that his master was Lelio Colista, today considered a minor composer, but admired in his time as the Kapellmeister at the Church of San Marcello at Corso in Rome. In his time, Colista was called the true Orpheus of Rome. After centuries of forgetfulness, it's only in the 21st century that Colista's works have begun to be revisited and heard. Colista played the guitar, lute and theorbo. He also worked as a custodian of works of art in the Papal Chapel. What survives of his music shows that he was equally proficient in vocal and instrumental music. Corelli, the most important Italian composer of his time, is full of praise for Colista, and his works also served as a model for Purcell, who is the greatest British Baroque composer. What was the situation of the guitar, or as we call now the Baroque guitar, during the time of Gaspar Sanz? Well, the Renaissance guitar in the previous century generally had 4 double strings, which you call courses. The first appearance of a 5-string instrument was in 1555 in a Spanish book called Declaration of Musical Instruments, written by Juan Bermudo. The first method for this instrument was published in the 1590s by Juan Carlos Amat, also in Spain. In general, whoever played the guitar had to be able to improvise chords over a bass line in what we call basso continuo or figure bass, which is also what defines the emergence of a new musical style that we call today Baroque music. It almost always appeared with the tuning A, D, G, B, E, but some of these double strings were tuned in unison and other of them in octaves. That means that these double strings or courses were not always organized from the lowest to the highest. Jacob Limber playing Folias by Gaspar Sanz. In Sanz's case, it seems that he adopted the tuning previously used by Valdambrini, in which the double G string, that is, the third order, was the lowest and was in the center of the instrument. In practice, that means that Sanz's Spanish guitar had no low strings. It usually had 12 full frets and a few extra frets for occasional forays into higher notes. Visually, it was a beautiful, elegant, richly decorated instrument, and if you like Baroque art, you have certainly seen both the instruments and iconography representing Baroque guitars. The most famous is Vermeer's painting The Guitarist, which is now in Kenwood House in London. This is Rolf Lislevan playing Passacaglia by Gaspar Sanz. We shouldn't forget that this is most likely the type of instrument that the colonizers brought to the Americas and gave rise to dozens of similar instruments in Latin American countries. This includes the wire guitar or hillbilly guitar in Brazil, which maintain the tradition of having a floating or unstable tuning and alternating a rasgueado style, that is, strumming the strings, with the plucking style, that is, carefully playing them with the fingertips. This is Ivan Vilela playing the Brazilian guitar. It was only from 1630 onwards that a solo repertoire began to be published for the guitar. Following the previous example of the lutes, this music was written not with staff notation but with tablatures. Tablatures are a practical notation system where, instead of the acoustic pitch of the notes, the position of the fingers on the fingerboard is written, combined with some basic information about the rhythm. Nowadays, the guitar in pop music generally uses a similar system, which we call ciphers or chord system. Many people think that tablature is a kind of amateur or incomplete method of notation, but in fact, it is the most efficient one for lutes and old guitars. It makes life much easier for players who have to play instruments with different tuning system all the time. And it also leaves much more creative leeway for people who read tablatures. This is Rolf Lislevan playing Hatjas. Gaspar Sanz models were certainly Italian and French composers. The oldest of them is Giovanni Paolo Foscarini, who was nicknamed Il Furioso, the Furious. His first three guitar books, published around 1630, are the oldest examples of printed Italian tablature for the guitar. Foscarini was renowned both in Italy and in the Spanish Netherlands, and he published his music in Rome. It was he who popularized the mixed style that alternates strumming and plucking. Rob McKillop playing Foscarini. Foscarini's style influenced a younger generation in which a name stands out and certainly was an influencer to Sanz, that is Francesco or François Corbetta. Corbetta was proud of having never played the lute. He achieved success exclusively playing the guitar. He began his career in Bologna and then at the court of Mantua. He frequently took leave to travel to Spain, Germany, and the Spanish Netherlands. From 1650s, he was employed by the court of no less than Louis XIV in Paris. In the last 20 years of his career, he was also employed by Charles II of England. Curiously, he supplemented his income as a musician with gambling. He received from Charles II the monopoly of the commercial exploitation of the game of roulette. Sanz called Corbetta the best of all. He has profound works full of dramatic dissonances. They are divided into 6 books that were published between 1639 and 1674. Thus, he popularized the mixed style throughout Europe. This is Jacob Limber playing Corbetta. I also find interesting to note that Corbetta is purely Italian in his first 2 books, and he Frenchifies his music in later publications. Other composers who must have influenced Sanz are Bortolotti and Granata. Giovanni Battista Granata was the most prolific of them all, publishing 7 books of music, not only with dance music but also with toccatas, preludes, and chaconnes. Granata was born in Torino. Although he maintained a career as a lutenist throughout his life, his main activity was as a barber surgeon. This is Pierre Pitzel playing Granata. Granata's music is surely the most complicated of this era. It includes the upper register of the instrument, Also campanelas, which is a way of fingering scales where each note is played on a different string, creating resonance, and complicated rhythms. His fourth book is one of the few sources to include music of a rare instrument, the theorbate guitar or guitar theorbo, which has, in addition to the 5 double strings, 7 freestanding strings which are only played open. He also published chamber music for the Baroque guitar together with violin and viola. There is a work by Granata that has ended up generating some controversy. It is somewhat similar to one of the anthems in rock history. It's the song everyone knows, Stairway to Heaven by Led Zeppelin. I think there is a greater chance that is just a coincidence. I cannot believe that Jimmy Page ever knew anything written by Granata. But the similarity is perceptible. The Stephen Stubbs leading a performance of Granata. In this scenario, we see Gaspar Sanz as a musician versed in highly experimental and complicated music who used his knowledge to cast learned eye on material that had its origins in the streets, popular music. Returning to Spain, he was appointed guitar teacher to Don Juan José of Austria. He was the only illegitimate son recognized by King Philip IV, and he was an important military and political leader whose mother was a very well-known actress at the time. Sanz's first book of instruction of music upon the Spanish guitar was published in Saragossa in 1674 and dedicated to Don Juan of Austria. The second book was published almost simultaneously, and the third one in the following year. The three were republished together no less than 8 times in the space of some 20 years. These decades also occupied Sanz with his literary pursuits. His translation of L'uomo di lettere, The Man of Letters, which is a treatise on classical rhetoric by the Jesuit historian Daniele Bartoli, was republished decades after Sanz's death, which happened in 1710. This is Alberto Mesirca playing Españoletas by Gaspar Sanz. Some tablatures are correct from a topological point of view. That is, the high string corresponds to the lowest line, and the string that is furthest from the ground corresponds to the highest line. But he also uses a system that is very similar to the Nashville tablature, in which he represents chord progressions with a sequence of letters. This is Hopkinson Smith playing Sarabanda Francesa. The spirit of Sanz's work is to offer examples of how the dances in vogue at the time could be performed on the guitar. He certainly did not expect the music to be performed literally as written, but rather that his examples would serve as a starting point for the performance on improvisations or original compositions. This is Alberto Mesirca playing Villanos. Sanz's method of organization is not encyclopedic, it is circumstantial. He alternates dances of international origin that would later become part of the standard Baroque suite in international music, such as sarabands, passacaglia, alemands, chaconas, jigs, and the like, as well as those that were already falling into disuse, such as gallards, la vuelta, and pavanas. Rolf Lislevan playing Pavanas by Sanz. Some of the dances are clearly popular locally, that is, Spanish music or from the kingdoms of Spain abroad, such as Villanos, Españoletas, Tarantelas, Matachins, Canarios, etc. Canarios, which were presumably originated in the Canary Islands, ended up becoming Sanz's best-known piece, played and recorded by all the best-known guitarists in the 20th century. It has a rhythm that is similar to that of the tarantella and leaves plenty of room for joyful improvisation. José Miguel Moreno playing Canarios. Some other pieces seem to describe events, festivities, celebrations. For example, the Danza de las Hachas, or Dance of the Torches, or Jácaras, which was typical as an interlude of theater plays, or Lantururu, or the Matachins, which were danced during Carnival and had some kind of Moorish evocations. Hopkinson Smith playing matachin. Some of Sanz's pieces, in fact, must have been brought to the Americas. Marisápalos, for instance, gained some lyrics in Brazil by poet Gregório de Matos. By the way, it was a kind of pornographic lyrics called Marinícolas.
Marisápalos bajo la tarde al verde sotillo de Vacia Madrid, porque entonces besándole ella no hubiese más Flandes que ver su país, no hubiese más Flandes que ver su país. Marisápalos era muchacha y enamorada de Pedro Martín, por sobrina del cura estimada, la gala del pueblo, la flor del abril, la gala del pueblo, la flor del abril.
This is Guilherme de Camargo playing Marisápalos under the guidance of Maestro Ricardo Cangi. The second volume of the instructions has imitations of bugles and trumpets, with incenses on words were very curious songs from Spain and foreign nations, such as the Cavalry of Naples, the Sfacciata of Naples, the Mignona from Catalonia, the Girl from Portugal, the trumpets of the King of Sweden, and so on and so forth. This is Hopkinson Smith playing clarines y trompetas. Some pieces also fall into a more purely instrumental style, such as the sesquialteras and preludes. Alberto Mesirca playing a prelude by Sanz. Some pieces also have a more learned style of contrapuntal composition, such as fugues and ricercares. Jacob Limber playing Ricercare by Sanz. An element that pervades much of this music is the presence of the Spanish cadence, which is a descending sequence of 4 chords that is immediately recognizable and that expresses the tragic and desolate feeling of life that spans the centuries in Spanish music, particularly in flamenco music. Sanz's music, like that of so many other ancient Spanish composers, remained dormant in code volumes abandoned in libraries for at least 2.5 centuries. The revivalist wave of the early 20th century finally reached the guitar and related instruments, and it has to thank a central figure, the Spanish guitarist and musicologist Emilio Pujol, who from the 1920s onwards began publishing the Library of Ancient Music with the French publisher Max Eschig. This collection included the first modern editions, pieces of easy or medium difficulty by dozens of composers nobody had heard about, including those mentioned earlier in this episode. It was from then on that pieces such as Españoletas, Canarios, Gallardas began to be played by guitarists all over the world. This is no less than Andrés Segovia playing Gallardas by Sanz. This rediscovery did not go unnoticed by modernist composers. There was a scenario where the Spanish Civil War was already taking shape in the horizon, together with the glorious vocal music of the 16th century. The music of Sanz, Guerau, and Santiago de Murcia came to represent an ancestral cultural unity of the entire Spanish nation and a precedent for the search for a modern Spanish musical identity. Manuel de Falla quotes Sanz's music in his puppet opera El Retablo de Maese Pedro, Master Pedro's puppet theater that is based on an episode from Cervantes' Don Quixote. It was premiered exactly in 1923 when Emilio Pujol participated along with other musicians operating the puppets. This is Falla's El Retablo de Maese Pedro. Sanz's music also stars in one of the most beloved works in the guitar repertoire, that is the Fantasia para un Gentilhombre by Joaquín Rodrigo. The most famous guitarist of the 20th century, Andrés Segovia, for various reasons, never played the most famous guitar concerto of the 20th century, Rodrigo's Concierto de Aranjuez. To ease the unpleasant atmosphere that was created by this refusal, Segovia asked Rodrigo to write another concerto, this time based on themes by Gaspar Sanz, tailored to highlight Segovia's best qualities. According to the composer, this work brings together two noblemen of the guitar who were separated by 300 years, Sanz and Segovia. This was the main work for guitar and orchestra that Segovia played in the final decades of his career. Andrés Segovia playing Rodrigo's Fantasia para un gentilhombre. To play Sanz's music with the spirit of textual fidelity that is the norm in most styles of classical music from the 19th century onwards would be like a betrayal of the creative room that Sanz tried to create in his music. Furthermore, the magical resonance obtained with the particular tuning system of Baroque guitars is very difficult to reproduce with the 6 strings of the modern guitar. Abel Carlevaro playing Paradetas. Some famous guitarists of the late 20th century have composed their own arrangements of Sanz's music, exploring more fully the resources of the modern guitar. The example we've just heard is by the Uruguayan composer and guitarist Abel Carlevaro, but another well-known version of this piece is by the Spaniard Narciso Yepes, which was recorded for GuitarCoop by the great Italian guitarist Agnello Desiderio. This is Agnello Desiderio playing Canarios by Gaspar Sanz. Sanz's music today is relatively little known and studied except for the most famous pieces among guitar students. But it's even more regrettable that the music of his two great compatriots and contemporaries, Guerau and Santiago de Murcia, is even less so. The music of Sanz and these composers is fascinating both for its musical value and for what it represents for the formation of modern Spanish culture, including the art of flamenco, which was still in its very early stages of formation at the time. Not to mention how much it foreshadows the multitude of styles of Latin American music today. José Miguel Moreno playing sarabanda. A new generation of lutenists such as Rolf Lieslevan, José Miguel Moreno, or Paul Odette have arranged Sanz themes for small instrumental groups, as would certainly have been the case in the 17th century. We can hear in these arrangements, here and there, perhaps even unintentionally, some contemporary elements. This creates a kind of fold in time, a fleeting sensation of aesthetic and temporal displacement, like an extra who appears briefly wearing a watch in his wrist or designer shirt in a historical film. This potential is testimony to the genius, albeit punctual and modest, of guitarist composer Gaspar Sanz. Rolf Lieslevan playing Jácaras. Pujol and Segovia were the first to record Sanz. Once popular among guitarists, today it seems to be the exclusive territory of lutenists. Their approach ranges from a literal interpretation, such as those of Jacob Lindberg or Alberto Mesirca, to very free and creative versions like those of Hopkinson Smith and José Miguel Moreno. All of them offer a delightful listening experience and a sampling of the many possibilities for the interpretation of Sanz's music is illustrated or highlighted in the playlist for this episode, which you can access through the same GuitarCoop channel on streaming platforms. I would like to end this episode with Aniello Desiderio playing a track from his album Chacon, released by GuitarCoop. I'd also like to thank Henrique Caldas for technical works for this episode, and I hope to see you next month. GuitarCoop Podcasts. Great composers. Conceived and presented by Fabio Zanon.